So this is the course project presentation for Group 27. So we're broken up into 5 sections: wrongdoing, strategy, implementation, the emails we found, and reflections on our strategy. So we're going to first look at wrongdoing. We're going to define wrongdoing, and although Enron personnel were charged with a litany of crimes, the most egregious wrongdoing was their flagrant and comprehensive endeavors to commit accounting fraud in violation of Section 13B, Section 2 of the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934. Section 13B, Section 2, Part A requires that companies with publicly traded securities like Enron maintain quality accounting records that accurately reflect their transactional history and financial position. Part B requires that public traded companies prepare those accounting records in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP. And that although Enron had an obligation to the public to maintain accounting records which accurately reflected their transactional history and financial position, the accounting and finance team clearly engaged in deceptive accounting practices to prop up the financial position of the company. Among the many strategies used, the chief strategy employed by Enron to manipulate the financial reality of their company was their extensive and improper usage of special purpose entities, or SPEs. So we're going to define SPEs. An SPE is a shell firm created by a sponsor but funded by an independent equity investors and debt financing. In this case, Enron would be the sponsor. Under GAAP, SPCs are allowed, but there are certain rules and criteria. The sponsor firm is allowed to forego the consolidation of SPEs that meet certain criteria. That means they can exclude assets, liabilities associated with the SPE from their own financial statements for financial reporting purposes. And so SPEs are often used to remove excessive amounts of debt and impaired assets, so assets that have declined in value from the financial statements of the sponsor, which would otherwise harm the financial standing of that sponsor. However, under GAAP, in order to have valid SPE for separate reporting purposes, they must be formed by an independent third-party owner who has a substantial equity stake that is at risk in the SPE. And this has been interpreted in the accounting environment as at least 3% of the SPE's total debt and equity, and the third party must also have a controlling financial interest, more than 50%, in the SPE. However, many of the SPEs formed by Enron were owned by Enron executives who held less than 3% of the SPE's total debt and equity. And also, these executives were by no means independent third parties, since they held positions simultaneously as at the management level of the sponsor, Enron. So essentially, Enron used numerous improperly formed SPEs to artificially prop up earnings, hide debt, also known as off-balance sheet financing, and remove assets with impaired value from their balance sheet. So these are all violations of the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934. Okay, this is the strategy section. We're going to discuss our strategy for finding wrongdoing in emails. The Enron corpus is a collection of over 600,000 publicly released internal Enron emails that span over 3.5 years, involves several hundred accounts, and it will serve as the primary data set for our strategy to uncover wrongdoing. Within the corpus, we anticipate the existence of dialogue between Enron executives and the finance accounting department that is indicative of a desire to shore up financial reporting through improper usage of SPEs. This language demonstrates a pervasive tendency within Enron to rely on the creation of hastily formed SPEs managed by Enron executives that lack independence and the financial risk required under GAAP, and thus would require consolidation. Furthermore, we anticipate the existence of language confirming that these are not true SPE formations in the eyes of the sponsor, Enron, but merely convenient vehicles to exclude impaired assets and debt instruments from Enron's publicly released balance sheet. So basically, Enron is fully aware what they're doing with the SPC is not in accordance with GAAP. We would also expect to find dialogue demonstrating that top brass at Enron, so executives and management, would take steps to insulate themselves from legal blowback resulting from their knowledge regarding the improper usage of SPEs, so the improper accounting, the wrongdoing. They want to insulate themselves. So our strategy will rely on the development of a carefully crafted set of keywords. Specifically, we're zoning in on keywords or phrases associated with the use of SPEs, or off-balance sheet accounting. Our keywords will also include terms related to the desire or efforts to protect against the legal ramification of improper accounting through SPEs. We will use this set of keywords to query the Enron corpus through a Jupyter notebook in order to obtain a cogent set of emails that we can review, that's reasonable, that would be indicative of specific acts of illicit accounting manipulation or intent to commit accounting fraud through improper usage of SPEs. Okay, we're going to talk about implementation. So although there are a variety of commonly used keywords associated with SPEs and off-balance sheet accounting, a problem that may arise and will likely arise is that using these keywords in a query of the Enron corpus would result in thousands of emails that are largely unrelated to our stated wrongdoing due to their prominent usage in the world of accounting. And as stated earlier, SPCs are allowable under certain criteria are met. Fortunately, one member of the team, which me, is a former auditor at a Big Four accounting firm with familiarity with industry jargon regarding SPEs, particularly for those companies who make it a routine of forming SPEs, and off-balance sheet accounting disclosure requirements for non-consolidating entities. In order to trim down our query output into a usable set of emails for analysis, I will use my prior audit experience to focus in on shorthand phrases and terminology used by publicly traded companies in relation to off-balance sheet accounting. The keywords I've chosen are OBS, which is referring to off-balance sheeting, immunize, conceal, and the keywords excluded are forward, 2002, land, government, housing, and subscription. The reason these were excluded is because much of the emails following the end of 2001 or after the fact, when the government became aware of the collusion, and so it's less likely they would openly discuss improper accounting since they were being monitored. Forward is just a lot of forwarded, like, automated emails, so I got rid of that. Land, there were some land deals that accidentally people misspelled UBS as OBS, so that was an incorrect spelling. It's an issue we're going to talk about later. Government, this is related to the word immunize. There was programs for immunizing children. Housing is related once again to the OBS misspelling for UBS, and subscription is just for automated emails. So overall, our query resulted in 7 emails. 5 of the 7 included language indicative of deliberate acts of wrongdoing or the intention to gain wrongdoing through the use of SPEs. The other 2 were basically just third-party automated chain mail. This is the first email that we found through our query, and it's an email between 2 members of the legal department at Enron. The original email is from Roseanne Engeldorf, and it's to a K-Man. K-Man is a top legal counsel at Enron at the time. Roseanne Engeldorf is also a lawyer at Enron. So in the discussion between the 2, they're talking about the Coyote Springs contract, and in talking about it, they discuss the acronym OBS, which we'll see is a commonly used acronym at Enron for talking about off-balance sheeting. And this is in reference to the use of SPEs to take items off Enron's books, like debt and impaired assets. So this is what they refer to as off-balance sheeting. And as you can clearly see here, that this email correspondence is basically the 2 individuals mocking the terminology used at Enron, off-balance sheeting, or OBS. And in the discussion, one of them asks, Roseanne asks, what does off-balance sheet mean? And she says it should mean meatball surgery. And this is in reference to meatball surgery, which means surgery intended to keep the patient alive. Doesn't really take aesthetics into consideration. Emergency surgery. So a lot of the contracts that were formed at Enron were basically meatball surgery. Kind of hastily formed, and they used off-balance sheet treatment in the formation of SPEs hastily just to get the job done and to meet their end goal. So they weren't like truly substantively SPEs that were formed at arm's length transactions. They were just kind of, the normal course of business at Enron to keep things off their books and to prop up their financial position. So in this correspondence also, Kay actually tells Roseanne, no, OBS actually means oh bullshit. So you can see that there's a general disregard for proper accounting and the practices at Enron for keeping items off their books, specifically through SPEs. And this is a particularly alarming email because the correspondence is between two attorneys who have a duty to shareholders, the public at large, and to their clients. So this is a particularly disturbing email that shows a general disregard and the prevalence of the use of improper accounting practices at Enron. So this is the second email that we found, and this email also discusses the use of the acronym OBS, which is off balance sheeting, and this is in reference to the use of SPEs to take debt and impaired assets off the books of Enron and put them into an SPE. In this discussion, this is regarding the Coyote Springs contract, and Coyote Springs was a particularly contentious contract that ultimately resulted in the imprisonment of an attorney and an accountant from Enron. And this is due to improperly recognizing earnings prior to the period in which they should have been recognized, and that was also an attempt to prop up the financial position of Enron. So this is clear indication of Enron's disregard for proper accounting practice. So within this email, they talk about giving it the balance sheet treatment before it's distributed to the masses, the Coyote Springs contract. And then they also call it the basic OBS stuff in response, and who's going to take responsibility for it. So this basically shows that at Enron, it was just the normal course of business to use SPEs to hide debt and assets off the books, and it's just the basic OBS stuff. Essentially, SPEs are supposed to be formed with independent third parties, and each one is different. There's different criteria, different procedures, but at Enron, it appears that they just have pretty much a set standard go-to approach to hiding things off their books and propping up the company. So this shows that tendency, as well as a disregard for proper accounting for public reporting, especially for publicly traded companies, as they refer to the masses that they need to get things off the balance sheet before they have to publicly disclose their financials to the masses. So this is just another good email to show the disregard for proper accounting practice and function as laid out in GAAP. This is email 3, discussion about interim OBS vehicle. So this is an email from K-Man, the head of legal at Enron, to other personnel at Enron. And it's in reference to a contract with GE that they were negotiating, Enron, to purchase turbines. Essentially, Enron had issues achieving certain criteria stipulated by the contract for purchasing the turbines. And during this course of this email, it was mentioned that because of constraints that, balance sheet constraints that Enron had, that perhaps that an interim OBS vehicle such as LGM should be utilized in order to fulfill the demands of the contract and to fill the TurboPack banks. Essentially, this shows that the SPEs were utilized as temporary vehicles to offset troubling debt that otherwise would impair their ability to secure credit to purchase things like turbines, because it impaired financial position, so it would actually impact their interest rates and as well as the terms of loans. So this is direct manipulation, and LGM was one of the most notorious SPE, if not the most notorious, as mentioned earlier. It was essentially what led to the downfall of Enron because it was controlled by Fastow, even though he was the senior management. So this is an indication of their prevalence of utilizing these vehicles for the purposes of manipulating the financial position of the company and to hide debt. This is email 4, unloading of assets and debt into Raptor. It's an email from David Delaney, an executive at Enron, to the finance department, to a Mike Jakubik, another individual in the finance department, and he's basically asking him, how do we immunize ourselves from the workouts being shed into Raptor? Immunize essentially means he's trying to, how do we protect ourselves from, basically from legal ramifications. Workouts, insider terminology that they're used to referring to assets and debt. And Raptor is just another SPE that they formed that was actually controlled by senior level management. Is basically modeled after LGM. It's not doesn't meet the 3% equity stake rule. It's not an independent party, and essentially this is just an indication that the individuals working in the accounting and finance department at Enron were aware that there was a lot of questionability regarding the formation of these SPEs, and they just wanted to protect themselves because they knew it was most likely fraudulent and not in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So this is just a good indication of that. This is our 5th email. It's a rebuke of accounting practice at Enron. This is an email from Jim Schweiger, a longtime trader at Enron, to Kenneth Lay and the board of directors at Enron. So pretty much to the top senior management and to the governing board of Enron. He discusses how he's dismayed with the fraud and the impropriety of the accounting practices at Enron and that have been allowed by senior management. This is following the restatement of the financial statements in 2001 that ultimately led to the downfall of Enron. So in this, he talks about how senior management utilizes what they refer to as hedging or hedges in order to prop up the valuation of the company and stock price through things like SPEs and through these vehicles just for the purposes of artificially inflating valuation, when in fact they violate proper accounting practice. In particularly relevant to our investigation for wrongdoing is his mentioning of Andrew Fastow, and that how he is serving as, a leader of an SPE yet working in senior management at Enron, and how this is a conflict of interest and violates, the requirements under GAAP essentially. And this is just a clear indication that the people at Enron knew what they were doing, and that it was pervasive throughout the company. And senior management and the board of directors allowed this to happen and go on. So this is probably the most damning email that we found. He even said that it reached to the level of criminality because this was in an effort to manipulate earnings and stock price, and that they profited from this. So this is quite damning. This is the reflections section of our presentation. In this section, we're going to talk about problems with the current strategy that we employed and possible changes that we might make going forward. By relying primarily on the use of specific keywords associated with questionable off-balance sheet accounting, it's possible that our strategy precluded the identification of incriminating emails that pertain to acts of wrongdoing at Enron. And this can come in a variety of ways. It's possible that the perpetrators of accounting fraud at Enron utilize esoteric or insider trading terminology, some jargon that is only known by people within the company, to conceal their discussions of improper balance sheet accounting, in the improper usage of SPEs. It's also possible that by focusing on terminology related to improper off-balance sheet accounting, our strategy overlooked other forms of accounting fraud unrelated to SPEs, so wire fraud. So there's all kinds of possibilities. Another possibility, and it's not that unlikely, is that the perpetrators may have misspelled terminology relevant to their acts of explicit wrongdoing, and our strategy would otherwise fail to capture these because our keywords are based on proper spelling, so that's also a potential. So certainly something has to be changed, or we have to address these issues, maybe with an alternative strategy that would account for the problems inherent in our keyword-centered approach. Something we did note through the analysis of the emails that we did find was that many were originally sent by K-Man, who was head of legal at Enron, and they fell within the latter part of 2000. This person is of particular interest because they are in the legal department, so they are a point of contact for the legality of different matters or potential blowback from using certain strategies. So we would propose an alternative strategy by developing an algorithm that would focus on correspondence involving K-Man and for specific time periods. So that way we would capture everything K-Man sent, not overlooking anything that didn't fall within the keywords that we originally used. So that would be an alternative approach.